Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Join us as we delve into the world's most pressing issues and learn how the people inside work toward a better future for everyone around the world.
Coming up on UN Insider.
14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention.
The United Nations Security Council adopts a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Will the vote mark a turning point in the conflict and the humanitarian crisis?
The situation here in Haiti and Port-au-Prince in particular has really gone from very worrying to extremely alarming.
Violence, hunger, and instability. Efforts to address an increasingly dire situation in Haiti. Water is all around, but for millions, it's often not clean or safe to drink. How the UN hopes to be a conduit for change. Next.
After months of fighting between Israel and Hamas and months of diplomatic efforts, the UN Security Council has approved a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728.
The guns have not fallen silent, but there is diplomatic progress over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. On Monday, the UN Security Council, for the first time, approved a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire for the remaining weeks of Ramadan. It also calls for the unconditional release of Israeli hostages and an urgent expansion of aid operations inside Gaza. But there is debate over the legal status of the resolution, with the U.S. claiming it is non-binding. Tuesday, several nations, including China, questioned that assertion.
I wish to emphasize that Council resolutions are binding, including Resolution 2728. This is beyond any doubt or challenge. Every country joins the UN with a commitment to implement the Council's decisions. We urge Israel to effectively comply with the demands of the Council resolution.
International peace and security are highly serious matters to be addressed lightly. If not, the very existence of this body, the Security Council, is put to question.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who recently visited the Rafah crossing, says the resolution must be upheld. The UN is also stressing the dire need for increased humanitarian access.
There were hundreds of trucks of life-saving humanitarian aid waiting to get to these people in urgent need, but on the wrong side of the border. Hundreds of trucks of UN and INGO supplies are currently backlogged.
Asiye Namdar, CGTN.
Life in Gaza remains desperate. The territory lingers on the brink of famine and the fighting between Israel and Hamas. Millions of civilians are caught in the middle, struggling to fill daily needs.
In the first week of November 2023, the Israeli army separated northern Gaza from southern Gaza. Although Israeli attacks are still continuing in all areas of the Strip, northern Gaza is still considered the most affected area that is exposed to intense Israeli operations on land, sea, and air. Samah Murad and her family arrived in southern Gaza in mid-March after her life in the north became unbearable. They began to suffer from the malnutrition. Murad lost her daughter-in-law in an Israeli bombing on their home. Her son was injured, and she became the sole guardian of her grandchildren.
The reason for our recent displacement is severe suffering. My son is injured, and we could not find treatment for him in North Gaza. So we fled to the south in search of treatment or an opportunity to transfer my son for treatment in Egypt. We have been displaced for a week, and so far we have not found a doctor to treat him.
Most who left their homes in northern Gaza, hoping to find some safety in Rafah, have come to the same conclusion. There is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
The situation in Gaza City was very difficult. The shelling was everywhere, and it doesn't stop. I fled with my family to Rafah for fear of the shelling. Unfortunately, we did not survive either, as a house next to our place of displacement was bombed, and we lost many of our family members.
The deteriorating humanitarian situation has tightened pressure on the Palestinians, who described this war as a war of starvation as well. The World Health Organization has warned of a famine in northern Gaza due to the lack of food resources and the limited entry of humanitarian aid.
I'm from North Gaza. For 3 months, we didn't find our food and drink easily. The shelter schools have not given us aid, and the prices are very high. My family consists of 20 people, and we don't know where to go and how to provide food. We live in a very difficult situation, and we can't even get food.
There are many ways to die in the Gaza Strip, from the direct Israeli raids and attacks to starvation and displacement, and also the spread of diseases amid a severe lack of medicine. All of these struggles leave Palestinians to wonder whether they will survive this war at all. Noharazin, CGTN, Gaza.
Shudija is monitoring developments inside the halls of the UN. Dija.
Yes, Elaine. Of course, this week, the biggest news in the UN is the adoption of the first ever Security Council resolution since October 7th attack, demanding for ceasefire in Gaza Strip during Ramadan. This came after the veto of the US draft resolution by China and Russia last Friday, which condemned Hamas, yet to mention Israel only once. The adopted resolution was actually in parallel with the US one. We saw both drafts last week, but it was after the veto of the US draft, the non-permanent members of the Security Council decided to move on with their draft, the E10 draft resolution. The vote was scheduled on last Saturday morning. However, we are told that the US delegation approached the E10 members on Saturday, suggesting some alterations of the text needed to be done so that the members could walk out the chamber with a resolution. Now we saw the difference. For example, this is a very simple resolution which contains 3 things: immediate ceasefire during Ramadan, unconditional releasing of hostages, and expansion of humanitarian efforts. The first 2 things used to be in 2 separate paragraphs, but the final text put ceasefire and releasing of hostages together so that the US could interpret the text as the 2 things linking to each other. As a matter of fact, diplomats told us until the last minute the council members were still making changes to the draft. For example, making permanent ceasefire to lasting ceasefire, which my French and Arabic colleagues told me they have the exact same translation of the 2 languages. So that also explained why even in the council we saw huge discussions before the meeting, and the US planned to come up with an amendment condemning Hamas, but then withdrew because it's deemed to be vetoed. Now, about the binding or non-binding issue of the resolution, this is what the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said.
We fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution, and we believe it was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages.
I asked several people, and here are their thoughts. Does the Secretary General think this resolution is law-binding?
As I've always been told, all the resolutions of the Security Council are international law. So to that extent, they are as binding as international law is.
New resolution that just adopted in Security Council would be implemented, given the fact that the U.S. colleague said it's not law-binding.
It should be implemented. Whether it would be implemented, that's another question. But what she said, this is really a joke, because she should have read the charter, which clearly says that the Security Council resolutions are mandatory to be implemented.
I think that interpretation is among lawyers and legal experts over this issue. There are differences of opinions, but The law is the law. The Charter demands from all member states to honor and respect and implement Security Council resolutions.
We have to realize that the implementation would be difficult on this one. Another big news this week is the announced departure of the permanent representatives of China, Ambassador Zhang Jun. He announced his departure just right before the vote on Gaza resolution on Monday.
My tenure as the permanent representative of China to the United Nations is ending by the end of March. And thank you so much for your support in the past almost 5 years. I'm very much honored to represent China in the United Nations for the past 5 years. We are living in a world confronted with many, many challenges, but I'm very much proud of China's great contribution to the United Nations in maintaining world peace and in promoting development. As you have all eyewitnessed, China is making great achievements, and we are seeing a very different China today, and you can count on China's continuing support to the United Nations.
Ambassador Zhang Jun became the permanent representative of China to the United Nations since 2019. We had quite a lot interaction in the past 5 years. For the past few weeks, he's been busy meeting with U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, President of General Assembly Dennis Francis, and other representatives and UN officials. And that's all from me.
Coming up.
We have now 44% of Haiti's population that is acutely food insecure.
UN Insider.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
We have now 44% of Haiti's population that is acutely food insecure. And just in parentheses, 45% of Haitians also have no access to drinking water. So that's another alarming figure. But also the WFP, they describe this as a protracted episode of mass hunger, and with 1.4 million Haitians being one step away from famine.
The turmoil in Haiti is also impacting the neighboring Dominican Republic. Thousands of Haitians are crossing the border in search of food, goods, and work.
This is the dividing line between a country facing famine and one with food for sale. Thousands of Haitians are making the journey across the border to their wealthier neighbour, the Dominican Republic, walking in with empty wheelbarrows and leaving laden with provisions. To a country where the United Nations estimates half of the 11 million population needs humanitarian assistance. But the Dominican Republic is not welcoming in Haitians as refugees. This market is as far as they can go. Police strictly enforcing the gates, allowing Dominicans out, but keeping Haitians in. This Haitian trader says he only wants to be welcomed, not pushed away.
The Dominican Republic is another nation, and a good nation. We get along. Haitians are always fighting. But Dominicans, they get along. They support each other. If we got along well together and supported each other, then that would be good.
Each day, Haitians leave with what they can carry. The Dominicans have offered them a restricted market to buy and sell in, but not refuge. They have to return to the violence and the turmoil. Lawlessness stalks the streets of Haiti's capital. Gangs now control around 80% of Port-au-Prince. They've overrun government buildings, slaughtered civilians in their homes. Some, though, like Dioxig Yang, have managed to flee the fighting.
Was that a scary experience to be living through?
Yeah, definitely, because a lot of time I heard that shootings and kind of explosions sound.
The US evacuated Gang, flying him by helicopter from Port-au-Prince to the Dominican Republic's capital, Santo Domingo. It's a precarious journey that for some has meant leaving the place they call home, perhaps for good.
Well, me, my wife and kid been trying to leave for about a week now. The process was really difficult due to, roadblocks and stuff like that. But we finally managed, very early in the morning to get to the embassy. And from there, they took care of us.
So far, 1,600 Americans in Haiti have contacted the US government, some looking for help, some looking to leave. Now the race to evacuate them.
The US State Department says these evacuations remain unpredictable and fluid, but they intend to continue them for as long as Americans want to leave and for as long as the security situation on the ground in Haiti allows. Nick Harper, CGTN, Santo Domingo.
Coming up.
We should be able to have, no matter where we are, enough water to meet basic human needs.
UN Insider.
Holding guns. Word protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Climate change events can be sudden and severe, and they are becoming more frequent. Francis Coe shows us how climate change is impacting one community and how some are working to cope with the dangers.
The weather in San Diego is famously flawless, with a reputation for climate constants.
It's still nice that there's no wind.
The sunny skies are what drew resident Shaylee Heller to the city. But over the past 6 months, America's finest city got a wake-up call. This month alone, not one but 2 rounds of atmospheric rivers pounded San Diego and other parts of California. These fire hoses of moisture unleashing torrential rain and fierce winds. A month earlier, an unexpected and ferocious storm dumped nearly 7 centimeters of rain on the city, its rainiest day ever in January since 1850. The torrent once again catching residents and forecasters completely off guard. The biggest weather surprise of them all came last August, when a tropical storm made a direct hit on San Diego County, the first time since 1939.
We had massive king tides. The tide was actually coming up onto the boardwalk and washing sand, seaweed, all these things onto the boardwalk that I had never seen before.
It is a rare event.
The historic moment was no surprise to UC San Diego climate science professor Shangping Xie. In the past, the area's moderate water temperatures would prevent storms from gaining strength. But with temperatures warming year by year, Xie says storms like Hillary will be more common.
Winter storms are going to become more kind of intense in terms of rainfall.
Professor Xie's office at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography overlooks the Pacific Ocean, a constant reminder of the urgency of his research.
The changes we are experiencing, we are witness, are happening at a rate, unprecedented rate. So in lifetime, basically, or even shorter than lifetime. So the coastal communities in California are facing difficult choices.
It's not just the oceans that are vulnerable.
San Diego is actually one of the hotbeds of biodiversity in the entire world.
Carlos Callado works for Wild Coast, an organization founded more than 20 years ago to protect coastal and marine ecosystems in California and Mexico, a mission more pressing today.
And these lagoons, these blue carbon ecosystems, are actually hotbeds of biodiversity. Between the variety of plants you can find them, between the salt marsh plants in and around the water, the riparian plants all around them, the variety of wildlife, endemic birds, and many migratory species pass through here. California, unfortunately, estimates of our salt marsh and lagoon sizes has been reduced by about 90% across the state. But with that said, what little space we have left can be very powerful in the fight against climate change. Please and thank you.
The power lies in a natural weapon against climate change, deep down in these lagoons. Buried and stored several meters underwater is what's known as blue carbon, carbon released from the atmosphere that's sucked by the plants living in these waters, then captured, buried, and stored in the sediments below, a sink of sorts where it can remain for centuries. But when disturbed, it becomes a fuel for climate change.
There is potentially tons and tons of carbon stored in these lagoons here. So if they were not conserved, if they were not protected, there's the threat of that carbon being released into the atmosphere.
While Callado works to protect these lagoons, Shaylee Heller takes her mission to the wetlands of San Diego's Mission Bay, at least what's left of them.
Mission Bay used to be like all saltwater marsh, and now there's only like 40 acres left out of 4,000, so that's only 1% that is still that saltwater marsh. It's really overwhelming and scary and disheartening.
Heller leads eco-tours on these crucial and vulnerable waterways that serve as a natural barrier to storms. She works with the organization Ocean Connectors, which supports and raises awareness about ocean conservation along the Pacific coast.
The last thing I always say after an eco-tour is like, I hope you really take something away from this that is either like an actionable change or even just learning something that you tell somebody else, because I think the collective action will definitely make an impact in the end. There's still time, there's still hope.
Frances Coe, CGTN, San Diego.
Water is everywhere. It makes up most of our planet, but it is still a precious resource that is growing scarce in many parts of the world. More than 2 billion people live without safe drinking water. About half of the global population deals with water scarcity for at least part of the year.
Water, so easily available to some, yet a scarce commodity for others. Around the world, 2.2 billion people still live without proper access to safe drinking water, while some 3.5 billion lack access to safely managed sanitation. And this worrying number, the United Nations says, is threatening the goal of ensuring access for all by 2030.
The thing is, water is often seen by people, but also by decision makers and politicians, as a social or an environmental issue. And that doesn't get as much attention as it would if it was seen as an economic issue, which it is, because it is a driver of employment, and it's a driver of sustainable development. Look at energy, for instance. Energy is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. But we still have 700 million people that don't have access to electricity. Now, governments are very much pushing for electrification because of the economic repercussions. To change the mindset is the importance of showing how water can really be a motor of prosperity just as much as electrification and energy.
The 2024 UN Water Development Report says that as of 2022, roughly half of the world's population experienced severe water scarcity, while 1/4 faced extremely high levels of water stress. The climate crisis isn't helping either. Severe droughts and flooding are already affecting water access for millions, and despite there being enough water around, the biggest challenge, the UN says, is how to get it to people.
Climate change is posing a problem. Now, supply and sanitation only account for 10% of water use. So where climate change will affect us through water is very much through food security and energy security, both of which are highly dependent on water. We should be able to have, no matter where we are, enough water to meet basic human needs.
But with a lack of water security in especially rural areas, many people often migrate, adding strain on existing water systems and resources in the world's urban hubs.
There's very rarely a water-centered approach to governance and institutions, and that's really what we need. It's quite difficult to establish, but once it is established, it allows also business and industry to come in and to talk specifically about water coming from their needs, instead of having these competing needs ending up competing over water. So in this respect, our report is about water, prosperity, and peace, and this is where it all comes together.
Here in New York, quenching your thirst is rather easy and accessible, and the UN believes this should be the case for everyone. It says with the proper infrastructure management and investment, especially in the developing parts of the world, achieving this basic human need is not impossible. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
Our lives are surrounded by products. Take electronic gadgets alone, laptops, tablets, smartphones, smartwatches. But what happens when they all get replaced? The quick answer, a whole lot of waste. The United Nations estimates some 50 million tons of electronic waste is generated each year from televisions and tablets to unsuspecting sources such as washing machines, hair dryers, even vacuum cleaners. Now, only 20% of that e-waste is recycled. The other 80% end up in landfills, decaying in our quest for better, smarter, sleeker technology. Consider how much we discard each day. Now multiply that by the 8 billion people living on our planet. The cumulative result, more than 2 billion tons of solid waste every year. And a lot of that is actually organic material. Old bananas, stale bread, that leftover dinner you forgot in the fridge and eventually got thrown out. In fact, of the world's total food production, 1/6 is thrown away. On this International Day of Zero Waste, the United Nations hopes that everyone can think of ways to eliminate unnecessary wastage. So something as simple as this quintessential New York bagel ends up in the belly and not in the bin. Gerald Tan, CGTN, at the United Nations headquarters in New York.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.